Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. I'm just so pleased that so many of you are getting such good thoughts out of this. I appreciate your emails. I'd like to introduce Kwanjin M. Kwanjin Cook.
Thank you, sir. Kamsahamnida. Good evening, everybody. Put this in there, right?
Absolutely.
Ta-da.
Quality publication.
So how are you, Master Adams?
Okay, sir.
Good.
We're pushing through everything, making decisions every day, and we move forward.
Sir.
It has to be done. So it's the martial spirit. So can I get you some tea, sir?
Yes, sir. Please. Thank you. Many of you know that Master Adams and his wife Ginny took a double hit. Aside, thank you, sir. Kamsahamnida. May I pour it for you? Aside from the coronavirus crisis, a large tree fell on his house during a windstorm that we've had here, and so he's been living elsewhere. So that's been difficult for him. Chumanio.
Chumanio, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
It tastes so good after a Pumse class.
I think that the fact that you have held these classes so consistently, it's like going to class. I mean, you bank on it. It starts at the right time. It ends at the right time. It's been like clockwork. That people can continue to practice and have community with
in
you
the matrix of cyberspace.
In the matrix of cyberspace, it's a very good way to look at it. So I commend you. I'm thankful for our students that we've been able to do this. And it's like everything else in the martial arts. You get out of it what you put into it. So
many of my colleagues have been in contact with me, and my heart is breaking because their schools are closed. They have not been doing online classes, and so no tuition has been flowing in. They've broken their revenue stream, and they're panicking in some cases, reaching out for any kind of money they can get. And I feel terrible about it, but we were fortunate, as Master Adams said, to respond within 24 hours of the closure, the government-mandated closure, with these online classes, and they've just grown in complexity, they've grown in frequency, and quite frankly, I think all of us, myself included, have been benefiting from them. I know I've been getting an awful lot stronger, and my technique has been getting better because I practice 2-3 hours a day now,
And Shane looks beautiful.
Yes, he does.
Absolutely.
Right. So does Taylor.
Yes, and so does Taylor. So I would like to give a shout out to Instructor Radakovitz, because every week she has a question for us. So I thank you for that. And our question is, do the Palge Pumse have individual and specific philosophies as the Taeguk Pumse do?
The answer is yes, and they follow the exact same philosophical components that the Taeguk does. There's probably a little confusion in our school, Michelle. That's a good question, only because our Taeguk and Palge Pumse are offset. So in other words, we teach as you know, the Taeguk Iljung Pumse at yellow belt, where we teach the Taeguks, the Kichos at white belt, but we teach Taeguk Iljung at yellow belt. But where do we teach Sonar Maki, right? Where do we teach that knife hand block? At orange belt, right? So we reserve the beginning of the Palge Iljung for orange belt. Meanwhile, the philosophy of Taeguk Iljung is what? Does anybody remember? Heaven and light, right? Heaven and light. It's the Genesis Pumse, the beginning Pumse. Or if you look at the trigrams on the Chosun patch, that's why it's designed the way it is. The three solid lines represent Taeguk Iljung, or heaven, right? Or heaven or Genesis. The same holds true for Palge Iljang, right? So the Palge forms and the Taeguk forms, especially if you look in this book, the Traditional Taekwondo Core Techniques, the book I've written on that, and also in Black Belt Pumse with Master Chun, you'll notice there's charts in there of the Taeguk and the Palge Pumse, and they follow the exact same philosophy. In other words, Taeguk Iljang and Palge Iljang are the same philosophical component.
Right. That's interesting. We often don't talk about it as much.
Because of the offset, that's why. Thank you.
So, when they were creating the Taeguk forms, which is 64, 66 around?
Taeguk forms were 1972.
72, okay. And they were coming up with these 8 forms, and did they, when they did Taeguk Chokchan or Pokchan, did they make the form to match the philosophy?
That's a very good question. I'm not immune to being a questioning person. Americans in general, Westerners in general, are a questioning lot. In Asia, it's rare for you to walk up to your martial arts teacher and begin to ask a whole string of questions. In fact, there was one time that Grandmaster Chun and I were having a discussion, and he said to me, if you were in Korea, you would never be allowed to ask that question.
Wow.
I learned a lot from him by that method,
Sure.
He would correct me.
Sure.
So the thing is that it's hard to know whether the philosophy was, it's the old chicken, the egg come first, whether the philosophy came first or the form came first. My feelings are they followed the I Ching, right? And they knew what the order of the philosophies were off the I Ching,
Sure.
And when we talk about that, we're talking about heaven, we talk about lake, we talk about fire and sun,
Water.
we talk about wind, we talk about thunder, right? We talk about water, we talk about mountain, we talk about mother or earth, and we talk about the elements of nature, So I would think that what they did is they tried to create forms with those concepts in mind as they were creating the forms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that may be hopeful, saying that, because many times I'll get this question, and I too, as I said at the beginning of my comment, was that I too question these things, like where do you correspond the philosophical concepts with the physical motions of the forms, right? And there are certain pumse where you can say they follow a certain flow that matches the philosophical concept. But it goes beyond that, and this is, and I feel that at least it's important to understand, is that when we talk about Taeguk Ojang, for instance, okay, we talk about wind, right? And that introduces the idea of hurricanes and gentle summer breezes and the juxtaposition between the two. Where else are you going to sit down and start thinking about the wind in those terms, right? Or if we talk about Taeguk Chilchang, for instance, right? There is an old term called top stop for that, right? But basically in I Ching nomenclature or I Ching philosophy, it would be mountain, right? And the concept behind that is the nature of when to move ahead and when not to move ahead, right? And how many places can you apply that in life, right? When to wear a mask, when not to wear a mask, right?
Absolutely.
When to buy stocks, when not to buy stocks, if you will,
Sure.
When to climb the mountain, when to stop and rest, right? So that tentative nature of the cat stance gives you the sense of hesitation and proceeding, right? So where else are you going to think about that type of thing? So it sets up a mental concept or a construct to give you some thought about a particular topic. So the actual physical motions may not match the form per se, although in Taeguk Yukjung, when we talk about water, there are flowing motions in that
I love
form that suck the idea of water out, right? When you talk about water, you talk about it being very humble in nature, right? Water always goes downhill. Water carves out the hardest substance because of patience, right? So there's a lot to think about when you think about these philosophical concepts and how they apply to the physical motions of forms. Sometimes they don't, but just the firing of the synapses in those conceptual constructs are important because it gives you pause to meditate on those things.
Interesting. When I do the color belt forms, I always do it with that in mind.
Well, you've done them so many times that you're at that stage where you are doing them in a meditative state.
You know, fire, that 1, 2, it's like the flicker of the flame.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's how I think.
The enthusiasm of fire, right?
Right, and I love the association in Chilchang with top stop, because that form just seems to have all these like stops, and it just flows with that form. Mm-hmm. Always like that, and not everybody uses that.
You know, there are an awful lot of cynical people in martial arts in general, you know. I know that's a general statement, and I generally don't like to generalize, but the mind has to be like this cup, right? If Master Adams takes that pot and continues filling this cup up, and it starts overflowing of my cup is filled, it can't hold anymore, right? So in my mind, if I think I know everything about forms, you know, or if I profess not to but think I really do, you know, which some of our fellow martial artists do, then I'm not going to learn anything because my mind is full, right? So what we need to do is cultivate what the Buddhists call beginner's mind. And that's the mind that contains an element of wonder, just like a child, right? Children have an open mind.
Yes.
They're very open to wonder, right? So if we feel kind of the same way, not kind of the same way, but absolutely the same way about our martial arts training, then it's likely we're going to accept certain concepts that may be foreign to the Western mind, right? Some of these apply to our pumse of what we just said, you know? So it's very important to maintain that beginner's mind. It really is.
Great point. Thank you for that. We had talked many times, which I was a little bit surprised at where the topic flowed to, but it flowed to Shotokan many times. And I guess, do you think that Taekwondo is more styled after Shotokan, Karate? What do you think it's really styled after, or is it a hybrid conglomeration?
It's definitely a hybrid for many reasons. If you reach way back in history, right, and I'm talking back to the days of Bodhidharma, you know,
I was going to ask you about
6th century,
that.
you know, what's happening is the influence of China. Look, Grandmaster Vitali brought this up in one of his lectures, right, and he's absolutely right about this, is every country had its own, or every region had its own martial art, right? And it's said that martial arts tend to be, they mimic the terrain of the country from which they come. In other words, if you're living in a mountainous region, then chances are your legs are going to be strong because you're climbing mountains constantly or coming down mountains. If you're living in an area like the vast plains, chances are your warriors were on horseback. So upper body strength would triumph, right? You'd be doing archery and things like this. So different, and you know, that's also a generalization, but most of the martial arts that we're familiar with do date back to mainly China, and then filter down through Okinawa and Japan and Korea, things like this. But if you're talking about a more modern analysis of the martial arts, then yes, I would say that probably Taekwondo has its greatest influences in Shotokan karate. There are many different styles of karate. I mean, Wado-ryu, Isshin-ryu,
yes.
you know, many different kinds. But the greatest influence on the Korean masters who studied in Japan for a better education during the Japanese occupation trained with Gichin Funakoshi, and Gichin Funakoshi was Shotokan karate, right? So if you talk about Wan Kuk Lee, if you talk about Byung-Jik Ro or any of those masters, they all studied with Gichin Funakoshi directly. Wow. There's some controversy whether General Che did, but again, he really wasn't one of the founding fathers of the Kwans, right? His Kwan was an offshot of Cheongda Kwan. Odo Kwan was the military Kwan right. of the Cheongda Kwan, right? So we're talking about the founding fathers, Wan Kuk Lee, Byung-Jik Ro, Sang Sup Chun, these people, and of course our great-great-grandfather, Wang Ki. Now, again, Wang Ki was the only master out of those that did not directly study with Gichin Funakoshi. He studied karate out of his own mouth from a book. But what he did study, and we talked about this in previous sessions, was many different kinds of Chinese martial arts. And that was a function of his working for the Manchurian Railroad during the occupation, right? So he traveled all through China when he was studying. And so many of the techniques that are evident in Mudokwan have a certain Chinese element to them, a sweeping motion, lower stances. If you look at the documents of Tang Sudo, Mudokwan, you'll see many styles of technique that Wang Ki did with very low back stances, low to the ground, almost reminiscent of certain forms of Tai Chi Chuan,
Right. Interesting.
But to answer your question, again, succinctly, yes, I think Shotokan was probably the greatest influence.
Great answer. That's a great answer. I don't think I've ever really heard that from anybody before. I've never heard it acknowledged as such. So that's very interesting and striking. So we're talking about the Kwans. We're talking about the progression of this key. This is something that Grandmaster Vitali can chime in, sometime with. That what are they doing in North Korea? We have, WT Taekwondo. We have ITF in the South. What's in the North?
Well, you really don't have ITF in the South. You're talking about South Korea?
Yes, sir.
No, you see, that's the controversy. In 1966, General Che established the International Taekwondo Federation, right? And he did that because he had sent out many instructors throughout Asia, Malaysia and whatnot, to start teaching Taekwondo. And that was the first step of globalization. Second step of globalization would be the Olympic outreach program, or the unification of the Kwans for the sole purpose of unification to globally bring Taekwondo into the forefront as a sport. But in 1966, he founded the ITF, and it was doing well, but it wasn't favored by an awful lot of people. Then what happened was he attempted to take a demonstration team to North Korea not attempted, but he did, to try to draw the two Koreas together. And that was not acceptable by the Korean government, So he fell out of favor to the point where he took the ITF to Canada. And then Austria and all these other countries, So ITF is actually floating out there in the Netherlands where there was a vacuum until the WTF was created in 1973 after the first World Championships at the Kukiwon. So even today in the South, in South Korea, WT Taekwondo and Kukiwon Taekwondo, and now Taekwondo Won Taekwondo, which is really WT and Kukiwon, that dominates, no question, right? ITF is really still not recognized so much in the South. Are there practitioners of ITF? I'm sure there are. But if one takes a poll and says what is really studied, it's Kukiwon and WT Taekwondo in the South. Right. The ITF reigns in the North, okay, because General Che is buried in North Korea, for one thing, and it was embraced by the North, ITF-style Taekwondo. So if you're talking about the type of forms that are done in North, it would be the tools, the 24 tools of the ITF Taekwondo.
Okay.
And then last week, Master Vitali very adroitly asked a question about the independent schools.
Yes.
Like Chosun, right? It was independent. Even though we are locked into Kukiwan, even though our instructors, excuse me, not just our instructors, but all our rank and file students apply for Kukiwan certification. Because I feel so, I'm wearing a Kukiwan dobak because I feel so strongly about the Kukiwan and its mission. Do I feel the same way about World Taekwondo? No, I do not, which is one of the reasons why we're not an Olympic school, right?
Right.
Do I support it? Sure, I support it. You know why? Why? Because if it weren't for WT Taekwondo or the WTF, and absolutely positively Dr. Eun-Young Kim's efforts, tireless efforts in globalizing Taekwondo, it would not be what it is today. Chances are you would still be seeing karate on the front of Taekwondo schools if they even existed, because they would not be popular around the world, and if they were not popular, they would not be commercially viable in the West, in America. Every place you drive today, you go past a strip mall and you see Taekwondo emblazoned on a front sign, right? But chances are, if it weren't for the Olympics, if it weren't for Dr. Kim, that would not be the case, right? So that's one of the reasons I say I support it to a certain extent, but we don't really practice it. But the way the political landscape, the geopolitical landscape of Taekwondo stands today is in North Korea, and this is one of the reasons why Grandmaster Vitali travels to North Korea, right, is because he is one of the highest ranking masters of ITF Taekwondo today. ITF Taekwondo is splintered. Okay, so that's putting it mildly. There are about 5 different ITF organizations, right? And that was because of General Che. You know, everybody thought that his son was going to take over when he passed away. But on his deathbed, he switched it to somebody else who was standing there with him, and his son went off on his own and started his own branch, while several other people started their own branches. So ITF is, like I said, it's kind of out there in the midst, being practiced everywhere, but not in South Korea.
If we had the opportunity to go to North Korea, and I know that we do, actually, we should realize we have been invited. I don't know if the invitation still stands. We could ask if somebody was interested.
If Master Vitali goes, I'm sure it would stand.
So that's an opportunity that I don't know where else you're going to find it other than, you know, right here. So if you're ever interested in it. So my question is, if we went to North Korea with Grandmaster Vitali, would we recognize the Taekwondo that they're doing?
Yeah, and the answer to that is Master Vitali. Look, who are we talking about, Grandmaster Vitali? If you don't know him, you definitely should. Your head would be in the sand in Taekwondo if you didn't. Grandmaster George Vitali is one of the highest-ranking ITF practitioners in the world. He was the first Westerner to receive a PhD from North Korea.
Wow.
That's why we call him Dr. Vitali.
Wow.
He's a former state trooper, New York State trooper, and he is one of the most vocal Taekwondo historians I know. And he's also a good friend of mine. I received an award from the South Korean ambassador at the embassy in South Korean embassy in Washington D.C. a while back.
I remember that.
Because of my writings, you know. Right. And that was a great honor. Still one of the greatest honors I have accepted. And who do I look up and see is Grandmaster George Vitali. Came all the way down from New York to be with me and to see that honor. So we spend hours talking together about Taekwondo. You know, he's very opinionated, and rightly so, because he's very knowledgeable. So this is where we talk about Master Vitali, and we'll have him on some night, believe me. The thing that he said, and I'll come back to this, is that in Taekwondo, we have more in common than we have differences, right? So if we went to North Korea and we studied, we would see the low blocks, we would see high blocks, we'd see middle blocks, into-out middle blocks, knife blocks, front kicks, round kicks, side kicks. We'd see all that, right, but the nomenclature would be different, right? And the chambers in many cases are different. The forms are different. They're not the same forms. So you would have to learn the ITF forms, you know. The ITF forms are very heavily influenced they wouldn't like me to say this, but all were heavily influenced by the karate kata, right?
Oh.
Most people will tell you that. So are the Palge forms, which is one of the reasons why the Taeguk forms came along. General Che despised Japanese. He was sentenced to be executed days before. Excuse me, let me put that backward. Days after the end of the occupation. You know, if the occupation didn't happen on August 15th, 1945, chances are he would have been executed. But occupation happened, he was freed. So he despised the Japanese. He was working as a guerrilla against the Japanese, you know. So he didn't want to have any vestiges of their technique within his tools, but they do exist. You know, if you look at them, they do exist. And again, you would be remiss in not recognizing them. But be it as it may, yes, the answer is we would recognize them. We would have to relearn the forms because they're different. But many of their basic technique, if we watched and followed along, we would do just fine. Again, certain chambers are different. For instance, if you do a low block in ITF Taekwondo, this is usually where you stop, right? Ours is all the way out extended, right? If you do a back stance, we know this to be Dwi-Kubi. They call this L stance.
Yes, I've heard
right?
that.
Because of the way the feet.
Right, the feet, yes.
General Che, in one of his books, really does not talk about ki. He shied away from the metaphysical aspects of Taekwondo, and he wanted to be more scientific in nature. So he wouldn't refer to things like cat stance. You know, that would be a different name for that. Horse stance would be a different name. There's a thing called T stance, which the back foot, it looks like a back stance, but the foot is drawn in more. So it looks like a T if you're standing. So the nomenclature is different, but the techniques would be very similar. You know, we would be able to follow along. And if anybody has any desire to travel to North Korea, even if we still can at this point, with so much controversy going on, right. You know, and you wanted to study with them, yes, you sure could, but you better start learning the forms right away, you know.
That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We'll have to find out from Samada,
Shimaniyo.
From Grandmaster Vitali what the status is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the virus is one thing, and then diplomatic affairs are another thing completely.
You know, my wife says, there's no way you're going to get me on an airplane anytime soon. I worry about that only because I would like to go back to Korea. I said no. I said that 9th trip that we just did a couple of years ago was it. Number 9 is a very auspicious number in Asia, and I figured that was going to round it out. But I feel the pull. I love Korea. I really love the country very much. I feel very much at home there. I would like to go see Master Lee again. I would like to go back to the Taekwondo Wan.
Right. Hoki Taekwondo.
Of course. I just got a message from Master An yesterday.
Oh.
You know, he sends his good warm regards. So we have a lot of friends, a lot of teachers in Korea, right? So I would love to go back again. The question now is when? You know, how is that going to play out? Who knows, you know?
Well, I don't think it's going to be this year.
Certainly not going to be this year. That much we know.
Yeah,
you're right.
And next year is still up for grabs.
You know, a lot of people said it's supposed to be a cool winter, a cool summer rather. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just put the Christmas tree up and call 2020 a year, you know? Call it a year.
That's right. Yeah, that would be great. Let's finish it. This year will live on in infamy for sure. That brings me to something I heard you say at the end of tonight's class, the forms class, with the belt being a triangle of mind, body, and spirit. And to me, I may be wrong, but I think if you did a mental health study with our students and instructors and compared it to the general public, I would like to think, from what I've seen so far, that our student body, and I'm sure there are exceptions, are using their martial spirit and keeping their body moving by attending the classes that we have online and keeping their mind sharp. which is so important. Because every day looks like Blur's Day to me.
Well, my feelings on that are this, and you know I have feelings about it, right? Taekwondo is very much like yoga or dance or any physical activity that has a lot of philosophical content below the hood, right, under the hood. You can jump into the shallow end or you can jump into the deep end, right? You can come to a Taekwondo class and learn how to do a front kick, a side kick, a reverse punch, a wrist lock, a sweep, whatever it is, and take that home with you, and chances are, if you practice diligently, you'll likely be able to defend yourself if someone were to attack you. If you want to change your life, if you want to enrich your life, I'm very careful about saying, change your life with Taekwondo, because I like my life. You like your life. Maybe you don't want to change it, right? So I prefer to use the semantics of it as saying, enrich your life, right? Because every life can be enriched in some way or another, right? Yes. And so and this is one of the reasons why I chose to study Taekwondo or an Asian martial art, is because I do embrace some of the Asian concepts. I think our Western concepts are great, but I think that if I enrich them or enlarge them with some of the Asian concepts, it makes my life even richer, right? And if we think about the tenets of Taekwondo, if we think about, especially right now, perseverance and indomitable spirit, right? Many people have no concept of what they really mean because they're not deep into the concept itself. Indomitable will. Most people would not even know how to spell it, much less live it, At Chosun and in the USTA, we are sincere about what we do. At least I hope most of my students are, right? And nowhere are we more sincere about it than in this era right now, right? We've been given the opportunity to understand what these words mean because we recite them at the end of every class almost every time, right? And I've been telling my students for years, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but Taekwondo to me has always been a lifeboat on troubled seas, right? We've all come across difficult times in our life. And if we have a central focus, if we have something to grasp onto, for many of you it's religion, right? And that's fine. But to me personally, there's a certain dogmatic component of religion that I don't find appealing, right? But I do find the tenets of Taekwondo and I do find the philosophy of Taekwondo to be rich enough to take the place of that for me personally. And I don't ask all my students to do that. That would be a cult, right? And this is not a cult, right? So by believing in the code of honor of Taekwondo, by jumping into the deep end of it, by embracing many of the Asian philosophies, I think that, yes, this has enriched our students and has helped them, because I think that they take it sincerely, kind of weather the storm of what we're going through right now, easier than it would be if we didn't have it, I'm not saying that's a panacea, making everything just fine and dandy and we're jumping around like a fairyland. That's not it at all. We're taking this deadly serious.
Yes.
We're vigilant. We're trying to be safe, but we have an emotional cushion that I don't think other people have.
So let me ask you, talking about an emotional cushion, about meditation. And I often say there's different types of meditation.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And when I meditate here in the dojang, I sort of structure it a little bit differently. When I'm home and I'm trying to meditate to center myself, it's a different type of focus and movement of my mind.
Correct.
And I wondered if you would talk about how we could use our meditation and move it into daily life.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Excellent. The question is, why meditate in martial arts class? I mean, how is that going to help us kick someone in the groin harder? How is it going to lead to a more dynamic punch? Why waste the time? Why can't we get right to forms? for that matter, why even waste time doing flexibility exercises? We're bouncing around, that should be enough. Not for traditional Taekwondo, not for Chosun, not for the USTA, right?
Right.
Warriors in the past, both in the samurai and I would imagine the Hwarang, would use meditation as a prelude to battle, right? So the concept behind it would be to remove anticipation. Anticipation is wonderful. And excuse me, I think all of you are adults out there. Anticipation is wonderful when you're with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, right? Dr. Dempster, I think you're on. Yes, David. And you know, one of Dr. Dempster's favorite sayings and mine is in France when they're talking about having an affair, the best part of it is going up the stairs, right? Because that's the anticipation of what's going to happen later, right?
That's right.
So anticipation is wonderful in situations like that. Anticipation is wonderful when you're thinking about Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? But if you're anticipating a punch coming in, and instead your attacker throws a front kick or a spear or something like that, and here you are all ready to stop a punch, and this other attack comes in, guess what the result is? You're dead, right? So you have to remove that anticipation with response, with instant, sixth sense of response. The mind has to be absolutely clear, right? So how do we do that? Certainly not by entering battle unprepared. So by doing meditation, what we're doing is something called mukzang, and that's the Zen style of clearing the mind, right? Of appreciating the moment. Now the moment is interesting in itself, because just like a film, sprocket of film with the tiny holes in it, it's constantly clicking, changing, moving forward. Present is never stationary, it's always moving forward. So we have to stay steady with the moment, but we cannot think too far ahead and we can't think back. Saying goes, if you have a sense of regret, you're living in the past. If you have a sense of anxiety, you're probably living in the future. By meditating in martial meditation, because you alluded to different types, and you're absolutely right about that, your martial meditation will prepare you not to anticipate so much, right? To be able to respond. Now that's martial meditation. Your question is, how do we transliterate that into everyday life?
Yes.
And use it. So we know that two special elements of meditation, and you know, true meditators like Hal Pike and people like that who spend 8 hours, 12 hours meditating may take umbrage with what I'm saying, but the point is the breath and the posture are two very important things, right? You have to have good posture. Now that doesn't mean you have to sit cross-legged or in a Caesar posture.
Right.
You can sit in a chair, but you can't let the body implode. It's got to be dignified, right? So that's one aspect. We can do that sitting on our bed, and children in our school have done that, and when they're stressed out over tests and things like that. We can do it in the car. As Thich Nhat Hanh, a very famous Vietnamese monk for meditation, says you can do walking meditation, right? So there's all different states of meditation, in motion and non-motion, dynamic and kinetic meditation. But the point is the posture and the intent has to be there. And then on top of that, you have to realize the breath, right? And when I say realize, I don't mean, oh, you know, it's a discovery. I mean make real. When you're realizing something, you're making it real, right? So the breath has to be realized. The inhalation has to mean something.
Right.
It's like we said at the beginning of this last class, when you and I, you can be in San Francisco, I can be in New York, we look up at the sky and we see the same moon. We see the same sun, right? We may not see the same clouds, but we see the same sky, right? When we meditate, we share the same breath. We're making a connection with the key of the universe, right? Now, of course, again, that may sound metaphysical. Quite frankly, I'm a very conservative person at nature. I question things a lot. I don't take things at face value. But I have a firm belief in ki, in eternal energy, bioelectric energy, universal energy. You know, I have a belief in that. As martial artists, we take that breath in and we transform it to make our technique stronger, to amplify our technique. In everyday life, regardless of our martial arts technique, right? Putting on that aside, we can use the ki to fortify our spirits, right? Our attitude, or the way we look at life, right? So we breathe in the ki the same way we would during our martial meditation. But rather than just dwell on the fact that we want to remove anticipation and force the response time, we're not worried about that so much, right? When we're simply meditating, right? But we take the ki in, we amplify the body, just the way Instructor Garrett does when he does Qigong classes here on Thursday mornings.
Right.
He's taking the ki that we use to amplify our technique, and he's using it as a therapeutic tool to gain a better sense of well-being overall. That's what Qigong is.
Yes,
you know?
it really is.
That's what Tai Chi is without the martial component in it,
Correct.
right? So they're actually ahead of the game in that, because that's what their main concept is. When we release the breath, right, we're releasing toxins to begin with, carbon dioxide and whatnot. But metaphysically, what we're releasing is the demons of self-doubt that we always talk about. We're releasing tension from the body. We're releasing any form of anxiety, you know. So if we stick with the breathing, the deep, not the respiratory breathing, not what you're hammered into throughout your entire life, because you forget how to breathe once you pass infancy.
Right.
Right. You look at an infant, the way it breathes. That's the way you should be breathing. Right. When we do our martial meditation, or you do transcendental meditation, or if you do yogic meditation, my wife can tell you it's the breath of life that we're working on. Right. The mindful breath, the intent breath. Right. So if we can take those tools and bring them into the everyday existence of our lives through martial arts or through other forms of meditation, you're way ahead of the game as far as calming your body. You know, we invite the parents of our youngsters to jump into the meditative process, right? The brothers and the sisters, the wives who maybe not be training, or the husbands who may not be training, come, sit with us and meditate at the beginning of class. Do the flexibility exercises and then walk away, you know?
Sure.
The meditation is, to me, one of the most important parts of our training, you know, because it sets the stage mentally and metaphysically for what you need to do.
That's right. It does set the stage. And I remember you once, you said there's this concept in Taekwondo, but also in the martial arts of, is it one mind, no mind, or?
It's yes, it's Mushin.
Mushin.
Yeah, Mushin is no mind, right?
That's
no
it.
mind, right? That could be misconstrued in different ways. Mind, no mind is basically the way it's said, and that's a Japanese term. But basically, that's what you're doing is you're clearing the mind of all consciousness. You know, you may find, and I've come up against this, that certain religions discourage meditation in a lot of ways. And that's one of the reasons why I choose not to use the term no mind, you know, because certain religions believe that if you clear the mind in meditation, that demons will rush in, you know, evil forces will rush in, and you'll be possessed, you know. And look, if that's what they believe, that's what they believe. Who am I to doubt what certain religions believe? But I have a lot of students who are very religious, you know. And I don't want them to be fearful. In fact, one of my students came to me and it said, you know, my religious leader told me I should be careful during meditation for the very reason that I mentioned. And I steered him towards a website that used my book to reinforce the safety of meditation in religion, you know. It wasn't just a footnote, too. They quoted straight out of the book. So I like to make meditation as comfortable for people as possible. So I try to use the terms that I feel are applicable to what we do and not offensive to other people in their religious practices or whatever practice, you know.
And yet we do not shy away from it.
We do not shy away from it? Absolutely not. It's because I feel it's a preface to our training. I feel that especially the key component is a preface to our training. Look, if I were a car salesman, and I may be, we may go out of business and I may have to sell cars. You may see me at Leo Cadis, you know. So the point is, if I sat you behind a brand new Corvette, and I gave you the key, and you really didn't know anything about automobiles, right? And you go, wow, I have a key, and I have this beautiful car, and you get in, you turn the key, and there's no gas, and the thing doesn't move. Wow, I got taken, right? I have to tell you about gasoline in order for you to locomote that car, right? Same thing with martial arts. If I start you out as a martial artist, and I don't tell you anything about internal energy or ki, I'm not telling you how to power your technique. I'm not giving you the kinetic force to add to that power. So ki is the driving force behind the power of Taekwondo. And we derive that through our breathing during meditation. Right? So if it would be, I always call Taekwondo a vast mosaic. There's so many components to it. And if any one of those components, which are interconnected, are missing, then you're missing some part of the puzzle, and it's not full. Key development, meditation, huge part of that puzzle.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Kwanjanem. Once again, we've had a wonderful, in-depth, under-the-covers discussion, and I thank you for that. It's just very enlightening and very, I understand so much more with what we've discussed.
You know, I've known Master Adams for about 30 years now, and all through the different belt rank levels and things like that.
Right.
And I know how hard he's working and how seriously he takes this program. There are really not very many people on tonight, but those of you who are on, I thank you for tuning in. Please tell your friends about it. You know, if you have martial arts friends or people who just want to know about the martial arts, you know, have them tune in, because this man is working very, very hard to make this program a success. Every question he's asked has been really meaningful questions to me, and I hope they've been very valuable questions to you. So please, even our own Chosun students, when speaking to them, say, you know, maybe this is a good thing for you to see if you want to know more deeply about the martial arts. The only problem that stops people from coming on, I think, is that we do not publish the login number, right? We don't put that out there right away in our advertisements, only because of security. We don't want people just dropping in and may not be the best people to be on, you know? So they have to actually call in or write in for the login. If you have friends, feel free to give them the login, because this is separate from our normal login for our classes. You know, this is a global login. Give it to anybody you want to who you feel can benefit. But really support this man because he deserves it.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that a lot of people also get to see it off later on when you post it on YouTube.
Right, that's also true, right.
And that's how Mr. Vitali, Grandmaster Vitali, first saw us. So it's another way for people to get this knowledge.
Yeah, you can always get this on our YouTube, see a repeat on our YouTube channel.
Right, because the knowledge is unique. Somehow we have to work it into a belt test. Maybe when you get your black belt, you have to watch 4 of these.
That's a good idea.
With a quiz. So thank you so much, everybody. It was great. I appreciate your time. I hope you learned something, got something out of tonight, and we certainly look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks, everybody.